Here. So morning, afternoon, evening, welcome everyone to the first of these Adeption Global Chats. And I'm Mark, one of the hosts, my co-host Corey, and our special guest Dan, who's tagged in last minute for a colleague who he co-hosts Elevating Group Development with, called Letty Dalton. For those that probably most of you are aware, we've had some cyclones hit New Zealand. It's really impacted some of our team who are potentially going to be helicoptered out of the areas that they're in. So despite all that, Letty was texting me this morning saying she was absolutely gutted not to be able to join us on the show. She was so keen to be involved. But yeah, she's got to look out for the community in Piha, which is a western beach here in New Zealand. And her and my colleague Devon are both looking after the community and taking leadership roles to provide support and aid there. So they're navigating through. That said, Dan is a published author as of this year, so it's great to have his insight and input on the call. And for those that have not been to one of our sessions before, the aim and purpose of these is to provoke thinking and promote action. So there's a couple of requests as we go through the session. Tried and tested pen and paper. Feel free to capture notes specifically on insights that you take away from reflections and engagement through the session, and also questions. If you've got a nice gnarly question for Dan, or a nice one, it doesn't have to be gnarly, but I like to put him under a bit of pressure, feel free to capture those questions and we'll do a Q&A round later on in the session. In the spirit of promoting thinking and provoking action, one of the things that I'm going to be modeling is trial running and testing using Mentimeter to create some really meaningful engagement. Hopefully it won't be clunky for you, but in the spirit of trying stuff out, at the end of the day, we want you all to take stuff away and experiment with it. Trial runs do 2 or 3 weeks, because you can't think yourself into behavior change. You have to actually do something. And so I'll be modeling that today and hopefully getting some wins on the board by doing so. But bear with me if it's a little bit clunky on the way. What I'll do first is get us up and into it. For those, a number of you will have used Menti before. For those that haven't, relatively easy instructions. You can either go to, bear with me, go to that website address by typing it in and entering the code. Or if you're more tech savvy, feel free to scan the QR code and it will take you straight there on your phones if you've got your phone access viable. When it pings you to that web page, it'll just ask you the thumbs up that you've had the kind of instructions. And then I'll click onto the next slide when you've done that. And that will give you an opportunity just to capture what's the city in the world that you're dialing in from. So city from the world that you're dialing in from, which should be on your app or on your web page now. Awesome. Some of you must have used this before. We're starting to see some things coming in. What a great mix we've got out there. Fantastic. Keep those coming with that 2-finger typing or texting with our thumbs. And phenomenal to see you all here. Thank you for joining us. And I'll introduce myself very briefly. I'm Mark, VP of Sales and Delivery for JumpShift and Adeption. And I was originally a client of the organization some 10 or so years ago when I was in the central organizational development team at Fonterra, one of the world's largest dairy exporters. And yeah, enjoyed the experience so much that I joined the team 6 years ago. So that's my story, and I'll tag in Corey, my co-host. Corey, feel free to intro yourself.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. It's so amazing to see so many familiar faces and faces I don't know yet. So thank you for being here. I'm relatively new to Adeption. Today is my 92nd day. So good news that made it past that 90-day. I also was a client and a fan before joining, so had brought in Adeption to do vertical mindset indicator with my team at Target, was absolutely blown away. And so decided to join and see what the company was like from this side. And good news, I'm loving it so far. Prior to Target, I was with the Center for Creative Leadership, and so see some CCL faces too. Welcome to you.
Beautiful. And our special guest and author, Dan Lake.
Yeah, so I'm in New Zealand. I've been part of the JumpShift and Adeption team here as well for a couple of years. Very passionate about coaching and elevating groups and facilitation and making sure that people have fantastic experiences. And as Mark has mentioned, I just published my first book called A Good Leadership Book. So if you're searching on Amazon for a good, hey, thanks Jay for popping that up there. Jay's got one. So, you know, biased, but highly recommended.
Beautiful. And Corey, with no further ado, I'll be handing over to you to do the rapid fire and put Dan through his paces so we can get to know him.
Fantastic. That's exactly it. All right, Dan. So Mark and I brainstormed a set of questions just to get to know you better.
Cool.
We're looking for you to answer them quickly, and I'm not going to make comments. We're going to go on to the next one. So the first one is, what do you love best about your job?
The people, whether that's the people I get to meet or the people that I work with every day, it's the people.
If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing?
I think now landscape architect. I'd love to just be a little bit more time outdoors in the trees, not the weeds, in the trees.
Okay. So you're standing up, not crouching down.
Yes.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
Definitely cats.
Okay. Not quite the right answer. Coffee or tea? And you already know we disagree on this one. Coffee or tea?
Yeah, we do disagree, but definitely coffee. I think I'm on cup 4 or maybe 5. I'm not sure.
Okay. How about something not on your resume?
I think that the big one is a couple months I spent in India teaching English to Tibetan monks. So me and 4 friends moved up to northern India. A friend of mine babysat the Dalai Lama's sister's kids and did some tutoring for the Dalai Lama's family. And then we taught English to Tibetan monks for a couple months.
Okay, that's super cool. What about your newest go-to app on your phone?
It's an app called Windy, which because of the cyclone here in New Zealand, and it looks at wind and sort of direction and pressure. And I have been living on Windy for the last couple of weeks.
Makes total sense. Glad that you were okay.
Thank you.
What about something you're reading or listening to right now?
So reading right now, Dan Pink's new book. I think it's called Living or No Regrets. I think it's No Regrets, how looking backwards help us look forward. So it's just out from Dan Pink and I'm really loving it.
And then finally, what motivates you to get out of bed every morning?
Back to the people. So who am I going to meet today? Who do I get to work with? What are some of the conversations that I'm going to have? It's always the people. And actually probably back to the coffee too. I'm always very excited for a cup of coffee.
About that first cup of coffee. Okay.
And the third.
Thanks.
Yep.
And the third. There you go. All right, Dan. So thank you for rapid fire questions. I know you a little bit better now. So we're here today talking about tapping into your team's potential. And I think that word potential gets used a lot. And I don't know, there isn't one right definition. How do you define potential? How do you know when you see it? What is it in your mind?
I love that question. I think it's sometimes when I look at potential, I think I'm trying to assume the best, assume that people are actually capable of more than they realize, and that we're often, the majority of us are our own worst critics. So we tend to downplay our strengths, or we tend to talk about what we're not good at. You ask people, what do you want to do? And people talk about what they don't want to do. Or you ask people, what are their strengths? And they'll tell you 3 weaknesses. And so I think it's that journey of, you know, let's just pause. What's your potential? Here's what I see. And really trying to pinpoint those things. You know, a meeting with, say, Mark, hey, I see that you're excellent and facilitate. I see that your pace is phenomenal. You know, I see that the way that you approach people is you care about them. So trying to intentionally translate those moments and draw that out for people.
I love that, Dan. And what it makes me think of is just research around how valuable it is to tap into strengths rather than focusing on weaknesses. But so often we spend our limited developmental energy focusing on our weaknesses, which we know are never going to be as strong as the things we do well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think even, you know, James Clear's Atomic Habits, this idea of what's the 1% that you can do. We don't start out at a 37% improvement, but man, if I can see something that you're good at, even, man, you're 1% good at this. Let's amplify that and see you really grow over this next year versus let's focus on the weaknesses and just kind of filter off into nothing.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. And Mark, we have another Menti poll.
We do, yeah. It's starting to be populated by the team. Just building on something you shared, Dan, for those that may not have seen it yet, the Strengths Finder, Marcus Buckingham, if you've not had a chance, sometimes it's hard to identify your own strengths. Well worth looking up Clifton Strength Finder. It'll give you a top 5, $60 or $70 or so, and really insightful to help you shape what are the things that I'm really talented at, that 1% that will really make a difference. We can share that in the follow-up notes so you've got access. For now, we're on Menti. So some of you have started to share into Menti, your thinking and reflections here. So what does potential for teams mean for you? And then we'll move on to the next question in a moment of some of the challenges that we face. But potential, what does it even mean? Let's define it as a team before we look at what can we do about it to lift it. Some great reflections in here. Where dreams meet effort, nice. It's like that. 99% perspiration, 1% inspiration. Better tomorrow, untapped strengths, awesome. Transformative. Opportunity and possibility.
I like not yet. It's coming. It's just not yet.
It's like the growth mindset work, right? Fantastic. Great insights being shared. Thank you, team. And we will be sending out the Menti results and insights in the follow-up note as well. So you've got access to the thinking and what we call the old wisdom of the crowd. Because some of the great insights that are here will fuel us all in terms of taking meaningful action going forwards. So that's potential for teams, and then stuff gets in the way. I mean, you know, teams are often made up of human beings, and humans always come with their own ups and downs. They have strengths, they have some other stuff as well. So just an opportunity, and we're going to use ranking for this. Please rank to what extent do you see these factors that are challenges to you tapping into your team's potential, for those of us that lead teams or the team that you're part of, reflecting in your own working group or team that you're engaged in. So just a bit of strongly disagree through to strongly agree, how these factors affect you, and then we'll see what the averages are at the end. As you're seeing the range moving up and down as answers are coming in, when you finish yours, feel free to just reflect on the so what resonates, or what insights does it provide as this starts to average out across this group of insightful practitioners, etc.
One of the things that's interesting to me here is the colored filled in background behind each question gives you a sense of the range of answers. So we're heads down at work. I don't have time to devote to it. Most people answering 3, 4 in there. It's interesting to see the spread of answers. And a lot of burnout and exhaustion there.
Yeah, it's no surprise, and we'll reference this at the end. There's one of our colleagues, some of you will have come across him, a chap called Nick Petrie, is doing a lot of research. Netflix, Uber, and Workday requested him to research the correlation between high performance, engagement, and burnout. Specifically, they'd experienced their talent and hypos over the last couple of years, maintaining performance, but at a personal cost. They'd depleted their reserves to do it. And they're wondering what's the organization's role in this, supporting it and avoiding it, and the individuals, because there'll be one person in the team that's burnt out and the other 3 or 4 are fine. So there's some factors that is explored, and then research with top performing under high pressure roles, Navy SEALs, surgeons, and others around top tips, hints, and approaches that support people to navigate through the challenges that we're all experiencing on a global stage that I've referenced earlier with Letty and the cyclone hitting New Zealand. So we'll share some opportunity to engage in those sessions going forwards, but would love to invite just open mic for anyone that feels comfortable, what's resonated for you, or if you prefer just to tap it in the chat, any other insights, reflections you'd like to share, just some space if people want to contribute at this point via Zoom chat or unmute and share.
I can break the silence, Mike.
I knew someone would at some point.
you got a good patience there, so I'll jump in. I was just reflecting there when we're talking about potential with people, and often it's described in ways that people have or don't have potential. And I think it's much more nuanced than that, right? When you're leading people, you're leading teams. It's not about whether they do or don't have potential. It's finding what potential they do have and tapping into it. And is that certain skills or capabilities or project work? But I think it's going back to Dan's point of sort of spotting that that everybody does have potential. What are you seeing that they can do, and tapping into that rather than even asking the question of do they or don't they have potential. And like probably old talent grids that we've probably all seen and love or hate probably don't help with that. When people get put in that high potential, medium potential, low potential boxes, it kind of, oh, we won't worry about them because they've got low potential. Whereas actually we should be asking the question of how do we tap into their potential and expand it? So just sort of offer my thoughts.
Thanks, Marlon. And really nice connection into one of the elements that Nick Petrie talks about in his burnout research that it shouldn't be a surprise, but was. Often Gallup and others have talked about the significance of the role of the leader in creating an environment that fosters people to achieve their potential, like 70% of the engagement of a team being through the role of that leader. What Nick's research has highlighted is the relationship and the leader having your back is even more significant and nuanced than that people can withstand all sorts of things that would normally have tipped them into burnout if their boss has their back and is supporting the whole person. And then moments where they were then tipped into burnout were because either the boss changed, a new boss came into play, or in some way their relationship with their boss had become soured. So just that significance of the importance of the meaningful relationship with boss, he was just surprised at how significant that was. So nice build in there, mate. Looking for those potential opportunities. You'll see through the chat, there's a few comments as always. Have a look through, reflect on the insights from your colleagues. And knowing that we're moving through at pace, I'm going to stop the screen share and move back to tapping into Dan. So Dan, some questions to get you thinking and reflecting. We've heard a lot, even back from the day with Patrick Lencioni and Trust, and more recently, Project Aristotle and Google around the importance of psychological safety. From your experience, what would be your top 3 tips for how to foster psychological safety with teams that would allow them to step into their potential?
Yeah, great question. So I think 3 things that really stand out. So the first one is around presence. This idea that we immediately disconnect. You go to a coffee meeting with somebody, or even your own manager or leader, and somebody has their phone on the table. you know, it's just waiting for them to look at the next message, to be distracted, to move away from you. And so the more that we can presence ourselves with people, whether that's one-on-one or 1 to 100, the more that we create an environment of psychological safety. So the first one is presence. I think the second one, and this one actually comes from Michael Henderson, a cultural anthropologist here in New Zealand, but he asked this question of, is it expensive to be yourself? So if people feel like they have to pay a price to show up, to ask a question, to offer a comment, maybe there's not as much psychological safety. And so I think where that maybe relates to this idea of how we show up as leaders is really being intentional on designing the experience that we want people to have in our presence, whether that's a meeting or a facilitated environment, a strategy session, but are we making it inexpensive for people to be themselves? So designing the experience. And then that last one, and this one I've stolen from improv comedy. I don't know if any fans of improv comedy, but this phrase of yes and. So you're always saying yes to what went before you, and here's how I can add to that. And where that relates for us as leaders is, I'm not pushing back against, you know, your idea, Mark or Corey. You offer a suggestion, and I'm not, the first thing isn't how it can't work. It's, yes, that's a good idea, and here's something else to consider. Yes, and here's some, you know, another way that we could perhaps approach this. So that's a lot more sort of to do with this idea of, you know, again, designing the experience, showing up and being present with people. So 3 things. There we go.
Awesome. Tag you in, Corey.
Wonderful. Dan, I'm curious about, you made a comment in chat around the link between hybrid and burnout. I'm curious about your thoughts around that, and thinking about fostering group learning in that kind of environment, in a hybrid environment.
Yeah. So I think that the challenge there is the same challenge, whether it's hybrid or face-to-face, is back to that idea of presence. That if we show up already distracted, if we show up already, it's like, well, I'm here for this, but what I'm really thinking about is a meeting at 4 p.m. this afternoon. I'm not actually present with you. I'm not here for your best in the moment to give you everything I have. And so on virtual, sometimes whether we remove ourselves or we let our teams remove themselves, but simple things in that hybrid virtual space of cameras and conversations. And if I really go with the mantra, if you're here at the table, you're here to say something, not just to listen. So you can't be a non-participatory member. We're all here to be present and really inviting people into that space. And then the second, I think, challenge that I notice is that sometimes we think our content is more interesting than perhaps our audience thinks our content is. So we've perhaps been working on, whether it's a policy, a training, a new communication vision, you know, we might be the CEO, and man, we are fired up. But if we don't do that work as leaders of, again, the presence, the design, the experience, that really thinking through, how is this going to land for my audience? What are their concerns? How might they be receiving this? We lose a fantastic opportunity to really engage people, not because our information isn't good or our content isn't good, but it's that final bridge, that final step of really thinking through, where's this going to land? How are they going to own this? What are they going to walk away with? That's most important.
You got a lot of smiles and head nods at that. Sometimes we think our content is more interesting than others think it is. I appreciate that point about thinking about it through the lens of the audience, right? What's in it for them? What's important to them?
Absolutely.
That's so gold. It's and you can't do that connecting with the audience unless you're present, which was the earlier point and top tip, right? And sometimes I certainly experienced it for ourselves, where we've rapidly changed the format of a session when we thankfully were present enough to notice what was going on for the client that we were engaging with. So we'd spent 3 or 4 days building out an insights report for the programs that we're rolling out. That's 3 or 4 days of committed time, and we couldn't wait to share it. We knew we had half an hour, but I just saw the look on the faces of the team that was the sponsor team, and it just looked like they're in a tough place. So I just got them to do a check-in, like a 1 to 10. This is the sponsor team, right? It's going to motivate the whole organization around leadership development. And they were scoring between 3 and 5 out of 10. It was really tough time for them going through transformation. And so ditch the sharing of an insights report and spend your time focused on meeting the team where they're at. How do we support them and add value? And if we hadn't been present and just focused on our agenda, my vision as a CEO, the danger is you don't meet the audience where they're at. So you've worked on lots of facilitation training. We've evolved our art of facilitation to elevating group development. It used to be face-to-face, and now it's virtual, Dan. So we're kind of modeling how to create meaningful engagement, learning and development through an online and digital experience. I'd love to hear what have been some of your learns through facilitating that program, and what are you hearing from participants that they get that really turns the dial for them, wakes up their awareness, creates insight, etc.
Yeah, I love that question. I think one of the things I'm noticing is how many skills are transferable from place to place. So the things that maybe we traditionally learned in a face-to-face environment are place transferred into a hybrid or a virtual environment. So presence I already mentioned, vertical development, which we're obviously big fans of here at JumpShift and Adeption. The idea of designing the experience, that how are they going to receive it? Where are they going to be? They might be joining in. Some of you might be joining in from a busy shared office space. It might be at home at your kitchen table. Some of you might be in a hotel room while traveling. Who knows? So where are people going to receive this information and jump into it? And so these same sort of core principles applying. And I think one of the things I'm really hearing is how much potential there is, the elevation of, whether it's Mentimeter like you've experimented with here today, Mark, new apps, new tools, new ways of working. And I think the world right now we're hungry for engagement. We're tired of, not that tried and true is bad. There's a good place for tried and true. But when it comes to groups and engagement, I think there's a real appetite for not the wild and crazy, but let's experiment intentionally because we're drawing you into a shared experience. And maybe that's the key, is the idea of the shared experience.
Thank you. Love that. And I'm building into the chat a little bit, a couple of thoughts to amplify that. And I'll tag you back in, Corey, while I do that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mark. Dan, I'm curious about what's the best advice you've gotten about development, and what's the worst advice you've gotten?
Yeah, I love that. So the best advice I've ever got was somebody, mentor almost 20 years ago now, that told me that the books that you read and the people you spend time with will shape who you're going to be in 5 years' time. So the books you read and the people you spend time with will shape who you're going to be in 5 years' time. And it's played out for me. I've seen it. I look back on seasons and think, man, the jump ship, the step I've taken, career-wise, character-wise, relationally, all sorts of spaces, because of books or people that I've spent time with. And I want to continue to carry that forward. So I think it's so essential to surround ourselves with good people and good books or good articles, whatever that looks like. And then the worst advice is the fail often idea, but applied wrong. So fail often is good if you have a product. If you're trying to work out how to make a 3D printing of something, make a lot of them. Fail often, tweak it. It's a physical product, but it doesn't apply to character. You don't get a chance to often, once you fail on character, it takes a really good leader to give you another opportunity to perhaps try again on failing on character. And so I think it kind of ties back to who you are is shaped by books and people. And the worst advice that someone gave me was around failing to do with character. So we let that one slide.
What that brings up for me, the thing about surrounding yourself, you know, being thoughtful about the books and the people, like I've found it so helpful to surround myself by people who are a step ahead of me, whether that be in my parenting, in my leadership, in my experiences around designing and delivering for organizations, leaders, and teams. I love that. The thing about fail, where I thought you were going to go, I love where you took it with character. That's a great connection. I always think about failing often, like you're guaranteed failure if you don't stop and reflect. And so often we just tried something, it didn't work, but we don't pause and think about it. We try it again, or we give it up entirely without pausing to think about, why did it fail? What can I learn? And now let me try again. Obviously not in the character space.
Absolutely. Love that.
Love that. And a little build, it links into, for those that know Adeption, the technology that we support, there's a couple of lesser known innovation and trademark aspects of the tech that does some of the things you've been sharing, Dan. So one thing we do, we know that content doesn't help change people, even though good reading informs us. It's the right content at the right time. So the artificial intelligence, based on answers participants put into Adeption, curates the relevant content with a probability match to them. And then they've supersized it, because much as participants through programs absolutely love meaningful and inspiring content, what they love even more is hearing from peers or colleagues, as Corey said, who are maybe one step ahead of them. So we're able to assess people's level of vertical development or their adult development stage, and then select, I've no idea how the incredible guinea pigs in the background technology-wise make this happen, but select an insight from a leader who's at the next stage of development and share it with the participant. So, you've got a difficult conversation coming up. Bob, the VP of X in your organization, had that and dealt with it in this way. Would you like to see their insight? So you match insights from other peers in the organization, which is outstandingly informative. And of course, they love tools, but they love their colleagues' insights more. It's so relevant to their organization. So Dan, a slightly different question here. What are you most excited about or looking forward to professionally and personally this year? And I've no idea how you'll top off writing that first book, so can't wait to hear.
It is a little bit of a cheeky connection to the book. In the sense that my book is called A Good Leadership Book. But that is the thing that I'm excited about this year is this rising interest in good leadership. That we've gone through this season, particularly with the pandemic, and then what the media really jumped on around the idea of the Great Resignation. And it's just, I think we've moved globally away from this idea of this is my career for life and the golden watch, or the handshake out the door when we retire, and we've moved to this place where people are expecting and wanting good leadership. So it's not about, the Great Resignation is not about an inability of people to perform or to be committed or to show up or be innovative or all these accusations that have been made. The responsibility falling back on going, what does good leadership look like? Because when we, like your mentee poll there, Mark, possibilities, drawing things out of people, calling out potential, when you work in an environment like that, and as leaders, when we create an environment like that, people want to be there. I mean, even if you're like, come along, I see potential in you to clean up after a cyclone, it's messy, muddy work, and people are keen to be involved because of good leadership. So I think I'm excited to see some of the articles I've been seeing, some of the potential that's rising here in 2023 around what does this look like very practically at every level of leadership. And then, I mean, I won't mention Twitter layoffs and other things that have gone on in the tech space. You've read the news of poor leadership. So yeah, that's what I'm excited about, good leadership.
That's great. Here's what we'd like to do. I popped a question into the chat about be thinking about a tip or best practice for tapping into a team's potential. You've heard some ideas, fantastic ideas from Dan, some ideas from Mark and I. We'd like to give you an opportunity to talk to each other about that. So in just a moment, Mark is going to put you into breakout rooms. Please, please don't drop from the call because we're going to put you in breakout rooms. This is an opportunity for you to share a tip, a thought. What have you seen work well? One of the things we believe is that there is no one right answer, that tapping into the crowd's wisdom is honestly the best way to get answers to tough challenges. So in just a moment, Mark's going to put you into breakout rooms. You'll be able to see this chat question. It'll stay in the chat if you need to remember it. Mark, are we ready?
Yeah, bingo. And let's take 8 minutes. I'll give you a nudge halfway through so you know how you're tracking. Enjoy your conversations and your breakouts, and we'll see you on the other side. Off we go. Welcome back all. Hopefully you weren't whisked away too quickly from a great conversation, but just so we can make sure we can all benefit from that wisdom and insights, please pop back into Menti and just share what's your own top tips for lifting the potential of teams in today's environment. We'll share this, as I promised, afterwards, so you've got access to these great insights and the wisdom of the crowd.
Hop in. Oh.
Awesome. Keep those coming in. Great insights, reflections. How do we really lift the potential of teams? And as you're finishing those off, I'll hand you back to Corey to lead this next part, and I'll pop us back on Spotlight that seems to have dropped. So there's Corey, and there.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. I was super curious. Someone wrote, oh, Tim, totally fine. Focus on the driving. Someone wrote enable positive conflict for tapping into team's potential. I'd love to hear more about that. Can I put whoever wrote that, enable positive conflict? Can I ask you to pop off mute and share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, that was me, I believe, unless somebody else said it as well. Yeah, we were just discussing, and it was just build on some of the other suggestions around understanding differences, understanding perspectives, and meeting people where they are, rather than trying to be right all the time. So enabling conflict to happen, but making sure it's still viewed as constructive and people know how to deal with that conflict constructively and move to a better place. Just enables teams to see things so differently, come up with better ideas, and move forward far faster than when you just stifle conflict or stop it from happening at all. And one of the best tools I like using with those is Radical Candle, and there's some great stuff in there around those relationships and how you do that.
Thanks, Martin. I think that's an underutilized tip to tap into productive debate, search for a better solution, is tapping into productive conflict. Thanks for sharing that. So Martin has set us up beautifully. What we'd love to do is open it up for questions that you have for Dan. What are you curious about? What would you like to hear more about? Feel free to pop it into chat, or ideally just come off mute and ask Dan a question.
Cool. And whatever questions we get here or don't get to, we'll make sure that we get Dan to do some homework after the session. He loves giving homework as a coach, but getting some, he'll review those questions and send answers afterwards. So just a little note there.
Go ahead there, Dorothy. I see I'm muted there.
Yeah, no, Dan, thank you. I want to ask a question from your perspective, having written about leadership now. When you are talking about presence for leaders who just show up and to really be present, how do you help leaders really understand that? Because it could be very scary to be vulnerable or revealing or be there without an agenda or share your emotions. So how do you help capture it so that the leader doesn't feel overwhelmed?
Yeah, I love that.
Or too naked.
Yep. Yeah. So I think some of it is little simple mantra that I've used for about 20 years now in coaching and keynote speaking around relax, have fun, be yourself, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. So I think sometimes as leaders, we feel this pressure to perform in some way, the monkey in the zoo. So how do we just presence ourselves to pause and say, I'm here with a group of people or an individual, and it's just people, relax, be myself. If you're normally a funny person, still be a funny person. If you're a fantastic, active listener, leverage that. What are the strengths that you have to bring and put at the table? And then I think too, a simple tool that I've used, particularly if you are, what works both ways, introvert or extrovert, the idea of 3 cards. So sometimes I've got people even to hold 3 playing cards. If you're an extrovert, only play 3 cards. You get 3 comments. That's it. And then it better be life or death if you want to, pull out that emergency 4th. And the same way if you're an introvert. You know what? I'm going to push myself, encourage myself to provide 3 comments where maybe I would naturally say nothing. So 3 cards is a way that I help just try and I'm here to engage.
What resonates with me about that was a great question, Dorothy and Dan. What resonates with me about your answer there, seeing a connection back to multipliers and diminishers, being thoughtful, particularly when you're in the leader role. When do you want to play your chips? When do you want to speak enough, not too much? So that really resonates with me. All right, there was a question, Carrie. I would love, can you come off mute and share your question with Dan there?
Yes, absolutely. Where is Dan? There's Dan. So question for you, and we've seen this with some of our clients. How do you, when you have a group of leaders who are good or have good intentions and want to be good, empathetic leaders, but they have a boss, a CEO who is not, how do you stop crappy leadership, pardon my language, from rolling downhill? How do you help the culture and help those leaders be the strong leaders they want to be when they're not seeing it modeled and they're not being supported to be that? Anybody else ever seen this anywhere?
Lots of head nodding, which makes me sad in the sense that we can identify with that, Carrie. So there's a piece of me that feels sad because I so want that people would experience good leadership. I think when we don't see that, we have to elevate that translator role that we play often as leaders of redirecting a little bit. So where are the models within the organization that we can amplify and say, this is a model of good leadership? Where can we redirect and translate outside of the organization and say, acknowledging, hey, this is the leadership and the model that we're under right now, but that's not, there is another way. And then also there's a phrase that I use quite a bit, that's resistance is a sign of engagement. And so when you've got poor leadership, they're trying to engage with something. They're doing a piss poor job of it, but they're trying. And perhaps it's a lack of their own skills or empathy or understanding. And so there's a little bit of that coaching up. What are you know, managing upwards? What are they trying to convey? Not very well. How do I take that and repackage that in a way that really shows care and empathy for my people and creates clarity for my people? So you do have to spend quite a bit of space as a translator. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to watch. It's a painful thing as an outside, you know, consultant. It's painful to see. That is helpful though.
Any other questions that I missed there in the chat?
I'll tag you to do those after. I'm just going to move us on and make sure we finish.
Roland had a comment. Is it ever too late? Oh, go for it, Mark.
Sorry, there was a slight pause in the old reception there. At the start, we gave the purpose to provoke thinking and promote action. And so just a little request as you reflect for yourself and take the real juice and value out of the session is, number one, what's been a key insight or highlight for you, which we'll share via Menti in a moment. And secondly, more importantly, what's a small action that you can take that's important and relevant to you to make a difference for yourself or your teams? So what's been an insight or highlight, just reflect on that for in a moment. But for now, capture for yourself, what's that tweak, that 1% that you could apply this week or tomorrow that would really make a difference to you or your team? Once you've made sure you've captured your own action and commitment to that, something you can put into play. We often say, keep the bar low, it creates momentum. What's that first step? I would love to hear how the session's landed for you in terms of key insights. So I'm just going to pop up Menti if it lets me there. What are you taking away personally as a highlight or insight from today's session, so that I know it's landed and resonated for you all as our first global chat? As always, as you've captured your own thought and input here, do have a look at the answers from others. It might inspire another action or insight for yourself from the session. The wisdom of the crowd, and man, it's a wise crowd here today. So let's really leverage those learns from each other. Again, we'll make sure that we send these insights and highlights out to the team after the session. And I know, Corey, you've got another question for Dan, but just before we move to that, a little tool we call priming, just to give you a heads up as to what's coming up next. I'll share this via the chat in just a moment as well. But essentially, there are a few sessions that might be of interest, and a number of you have already signed in for the entirety of this season of community chat. So tap into that. The link will be shared in the chat in just a moment. For those that want to elevate their group development, whether as a leader or a facilitator, Dan and Letty, who you know is in Piha, sorting out floods and subsistence and everything else, will be leading a number of those virtual global groups over the next 6 months. Apologies for the US, we don't have live burnout engagement and well-being sessions running in the US yet, but watch this space, they'll be coming. For now, we've got live events in New Zealand, Australia, and coming up in the UK. So once Corey and the team get rocking and rolling in the US, I know they'll bring Nick out to have that conversation, another colleague from the Center for Creative Leadership, and make it available to yourselves. But yeah, nice and simple in terms of what we've got coming up, and I'll hop off all of these events, and make sure I pop the links into the chat now. While I'm doing that, Corey, I think you had one more gunning for it question for Dan, the speaker in the hot seat.
I do. And before we get there, if you also would like to sit in the hot seat like Dan and share your thoughts, perspectives on some aspect of leadership development, human development, we would love to know. And so feel free to email us at marketing@adeption.io because we'd love to have a conversation with you and what you'd like to share with people. All right, Dan, our final question is, if you had a billboard and you could put any saying, motto, phrase on the billboard for people to see, what would your billboard say?
Can I have two? Can I cheat? One would be that phrase that I said earlier, that the have fun, relax, be yourself, don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's really carried me through the last 20 years in some moments where I've gone, man, I just need that little prompt in my notes to remind myself to have some fun here. But then the other one I would say is definitely eat the chilies. And that is around, I love spicy food. I love, going to restaurants and going, I bet you can't make it so hot, I can't eat it. But where that applies in development of how do I push myself out of the comfort zone? How do I take that next step to eat the chilies in life? What can I learn? Where can I go I haven't been? Who can I talk to I haven't talked to? Definitely eat the chilies.
I love it. And with that, we'll say thank you so much for joining. So great to see everyone, have your participation in the Menti polls. Really excited. Hopefully we'll see you next month.
Brilliant. And one more for you, Dan, just as we go. I like my coffee how I like my Death Stars. Gigantic, on the dark side, and powerful enough to destroy a planet. I'm going to go grab a New Zealand coffee now. Have a great day, everyone, either in New Zealand, the US, or overseas. Thank you for joining us. And look forward to seeing you next time. Huge thanks to all of you for making the time this morning and afternoon and evening.
Thanks, Dan. Bye.